Here we are again on Apologetics Roadshow, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, fact or fiction. And we're gonna see what else he has for us. In the last video, he pointed out that Jesus was dead, not just passed out, not just in a coma. He was dead as a human being can be. And most scholars agree that that is true. And I also agree with the scholars, biblical scholars, that Jesus was dead. Now let's go to the next point of whether Jesus actually resurrected, whether Jesus did come back from the dead, whether the supernatural events actually happened.
How would we know if Jesus was alive at some point following his execution by the Romans? The same way we know many other things from history. We need witnesses, and we need to know that we can trust these witnesses. Do we have witnesses of the risen Jesus? Yes, lots. Fortunately,
No, I won't say we have witnesses. No. The text that we have in the New Testament, you won't consider those eyewitness. You consider them people who believe what eyewitness told them. They actually were not eyewitness. It wasn't like the accounts were from actual eyewitness. We don't have accounts of people who met Jesus. Paul did not meet Jesus. He had a spiritual event that he claims that is Jesus, but he never said he actually knew Jesus before he became a Christian. That's also quite important. Let's keep going.
they began preaching almost immediately, and we have summaries of some of their early sermons. They issued official creedal statements that could be easily memorized and passed on to others. They sent out representatives with authoritative traditions that would eventually be incorporated into the Gospels and other writings. We also have writings and quotations outside the New Testament from the next generation of Christian leaders, which included people like Clement of Rome and Polycarp, who knew one or more of the apostles and who continued preaching the message of the apostles, especially the resurrection of Jesus. But the most interesting source on the eyewitnesses of the risen Jesus is an early Christian creed recorded in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-7. 1 Corinthians was written around AD 55, and Paul says in the letter that he had already delivered the creed to the church in Corinth, which would have been around AD 51. But Paul received the creed long before that, either when he visited the apostles in Jerusalem or perhaps even at his conversion. And scholars date its formulation to within a few years of Jesus' crucifixion.
So they believe that Jesus rose from the dead date back to close to when Jesus actually died. That is interesting, but it's still a belief. Let's keep going.
James D.G. Dunn writes, "This tradition, we can be entirely confident, was formulated as tradition within months of Jesus' death." According to Michael Goulder, Paul received the tradition, that is, he was taught it at his conversion, perhaps 2 years after Jesus' death. Ulrich Wilkins says that the creed indubitably goes back to the oldest phase of all in the history of primitive Christianity. Gert Ludemann maintains that the elements in the tradition are to be dated to the first 2 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. Paul Barnett dates the creed to within 2 or 3 years of the first Easter. Richard Burridge and Graham Gould say it dates from only a few years after Jesus' death. Robert Funk and the Jesus Seminar put it within 2 or 3 years at most. Richard Hayes says it originates within about 3 years after Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem. And Alexander Wedderburn says that it goes back to the first half of the 30s. So there's widespread agreement among scholars from across the theological spectrum that 1 Corinthians 15 contains very early material that can be traced to Jesus' original disciples shortly after his death. Let's read the passage. Paul writes, "For I delivered to you, the Christians of Corinth, As of first importance, this is foundational information, what I also received, and here's where the creed starts, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time. Paul is writing this years later, so he adds parenthetically, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. The original would have ended with this appearance to all the apostles, but Jesus appeared to Paul later, so Paul adds, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. Notice what we have here. We have Jesus' death for sins.
I thought Jesus appeared first to Mary Magdalene. I guess that doesn't even matter. Let's let him explain and finish explaining before I give my thoughts.
His burial, his resurrection on the third day, and numerous appearances. And we have all of it as authoritative tradition within a few years, if not within months, of the crucifixion. As for the appearances, there are appearances to individuals, Peter, James, the brother of Jesus, and eventually Paul, to small groups, the 12 and all the apostles, and to a large group. He appeared to more than 500. The list.
Now, I must point out that he's talking about a tradition that developed right after Jesus died, that people believe that he rose from the dead. Close to his death, people start believing that he rose from the dead, and this was part of the core of Christianity, and many people believe this. If you're a Christian, you have to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. This was something that did not develop through legends or any other. It was developed very early on. Let's keep going.
List also reports appearances to both friends and foes. Peter and the apostles were followers of Jesus during his 3-year ministry, but James and Paul weren't. James didn't believe that his brother was the Messiah when Jesus was preaching in Galilee.
Sorry to cut you off there, but isn't it interesting how James, the brother of Jesus, did not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, or at least a prophet, to follow him because he was doing a bunch of miracles. He had to be after Jesus died. Isn't that interesting? Does that make any sense?
And Judea, and Paul persecuted the church and tried to destroy it. Yet they're all listed as witnesses who saw Jesus alive again sometime after his death.
Paul claimed to see Jesus after he died, and everyone else saw Jesus. That's also very interesting. He claimed to have a spiritual thing happen to him where he saw Jesus. But how would you know what Jesus looked like when you never met Jesus?
This passage eliminates 2 skeptical responses to Jesus' resurrection, the legend hypothesis and the hallucination hypothesis. At the internet level, there are still people who claim that Christian belief in Jesus' resurrection arose through a process of legendary development over a period of many decades. But this is...
The legend idea is not that the idea that Jesus rose from, at least this is how I see it. The legend idea is that the idea that Jesus is God and him becoming a divinity, a God, instead of just a prophet. Over time, you see it in the script of making Jesus more into a God as time went on. At the beginning, he was just introduced as a good person, a prophet in a sense, bringing the good news. And then later on, he somehow become God himself.
Actually false. We know, as a fact of history, that the resurrection was the heart of Christian preaching from the beginning. You also may have heard people argue that Jesus' disciples simply hallucinated the resurrection appearances. But a hallucination, by definition, is something that occurs in the mind of the person experiencing it. If you take a bunch of acid and a leprechaun appears to you, the rest of us aren't going to ask him for his pot of gold because we won't see him. He won't exist outside your acid-tripping mind. But Jesus appeared to entire groups on multiple occasions, and hallucinations just can't explain repeated group appearances.
Which is not what actually happened. Jesus appeared to few group of people, not a lot of people. 15 or most. The disciples and Mary Magdalene and others. It wasn't like he was going around appearing to many people. We don't have claims for many people or 500 people. We don't have their written account of this is what I saw. No. We have Paul saying there's a scripture that claims this happened. And Jesus, only very few people need to hallucinate and spread the news. If you're already prone to believing that a supernatural event, and you're already in distress from, witnessing something as traumatizing as, a crucifixion, you're definitely more prone to believing that someone that you love or cared about at least rose from the dead when you already believe is a miracle worker. Again, just back to beliefs.
So, we can't attribute the resurrection appearances to legend or to hallucinations.
We can attribute the fact that Jesus all of a sudden went to being a human that was just special to being God to legend. And we can attribute the fact that people believe at the beginning that they saw Jesus to hallucination. We're not saying every Christian saw Jesus. We're saying the first few think they saw Jesus. And there's evidence supporting this idea too. Research are done on this to show that people see their loved ones soon after they passed away. People hallucinate and see their loved ones. I believe I've seen my mom after she died. Quite like 3 times. So again, people are prone to seeing their loved ones after they passed away. And this could have definitely happened to the few of Jesus' followers. Again, 15 or most. Not 500, but you only need 15 people to spread the news to make more people believe.
Can we attribute them to deception? Were the disciples lying about the appearances? That's what...
No, I won't say they were lying. I will say they believe what they were saying. They genuinely believe Jesus rose from the dead. It's too much to say they were lying. Like they just definitely believe that it actually happened. They definitely believe it happened.
What I thought before I was a Christian, but there's a fatal flaw in the deception hypothesis. Liars make poor martyrs. While some human beings are willing to die for what they believe in, I've never met anyone who was willing to die for something he made up. In the book of Acts, chapter 4, Peter and John are arrested and threatened. In Acts 5, the apostles are put in jail and flogged. In Acts 12, James, the brother of John, is put to death by Herod, and Peter is again put in jail. The apostle Paul describes his life as a Christian in 2 Corinthians 11:24-27. He writes, 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods.
Isn't that a weird way to write 39? 40 lashes minus 1.
Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. The Jewish historian Josephus reports that James, the brother of Jesus, was stoned to death as a lawbreaker. Clement of Rome invites his readers to keep in mind the suffering.
These people are insane. I'm not saying Christians actually. I'm saying people 2,000 years ago are insane. In the last video, he explained how the Romans would actually do the crucifixion, the three-stage process. Just crazy. And you're just stoning someone to death because they don't follow the laws. Like, if you're gonna kill them, at least like do it in a decent way. Stoning, it's crazy.
Sufferings and martyrdoms of Peter and Paul. So the apostles didn't just preach that they had seen Jesus alive again, they were willing to endure prison, floggings, and even death as they preached. And that means they really believed what they were saying.
I agree.
Here again, it's not just Christians who draw this conclusion. Even non-Christians maintain that the disciples sincerely believed that they had seen the risen Jesus. Gerd Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. Bart Ehrman, we can say with complete certainty that some of his disciples at some later time insisted that he soon appeared to them, convincing them that he had been raised from the dead. Bart Ehrman again, it is a historical fact that some of Jesus' followers came to believe that he had been raised from the dead soon after his execution.
I must point out and read again, it is a historical fact that some is simply underline the historical fact but forget to underline the belief part. So it is a historical fact that some of the Jesus followers came to believe that he was risen from the dead soon after his execution. Believe is a key word here, and it's important to notice that it is belief. It's not a historical fact that Jesus rose from the dead. It's an historical fact that the people believed it happened. And they strongly believe for what they strongly believe in it, and they died for it.
Paula Fredrickson,
and I'm just gonna read this for them. I know in their own terms what they saw was a raised Jesus. I'm not saying they actually really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw, but I do know as an historian that they must have seen something. I agree, they must have experienced something they would in their own term use as a spiritual term. When Paul said he met Jesus, it probably did add a spiritual event, what you would call a spiritual event if you're using that term. He had something happen to him, change his mind, which led him to being a follower of Jesus. He genuinely believed. They genuinely believed it happened. That doesn't mean it happened. The people today that believe in a bunch of nonsense, it doesn't mean what they believe actually happened.
Know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. I'm not saying that they really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But I do know, as a historian, that they must have seen something. Fredrickson says that she doesn't know what they saw. But I do. I think it's obvious what they saw. The disciples saw the sort of thing that would convince individuals and groups, friends and foes, that they had all seen a man who had been dead, alive again, standing in front of them, telling them why he had to die and rise again. Unfortunately for our atheist friends, the only sort of thing that can do that is Jesus actually appearing to them, which means that Jesus rose from the dead.
I think the best possible conclusion to come to when you look at the history and when you look at the evidence, or the little evidence I would still say that Christians have or any other theists have for their claims, is that we don't know. You see, we don't know whether Jesus actually did rose from the dead. People believe he did. We know he died, but we don't know whether he actually rose again. That is what we have. And to say, yeah, he rose from the dead is saying something based on faith, because we don't know. The best stance is to say we don't know. There's no evidence for a spiritual event that have ever happened throughout history. So how can we say we know when we don't? We're gonna stop it here, and we're gonna pick up, and then I believe that's gonna be the last part the next time, and we're gonna finish this video. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please click that like button and subscribe. Have a good day, people.